Hi, my name is Maitreyi. I'm from the Square Circle Clinic at Nalsar University of Law, Hyderabad. The Square Circle Clinic is a criminal justice initiative at Nalsar University, and as part of our work, we provide legal representation to prisoners who've been sentenced to death, under trial prisoners in Pune and Nagpur, and conduct research on a host of issues from forensics to prevention of torture to mental health and criminal justice, criminalization and punishment. And today's conversation is about a particular way in which we communicate with people we represent, prisoners who've been sentenced to death. As part of a legal representation, it is extremely important to us that we stay in touch with our clients, because one of our core principles of representation is that people we are representing need to have their voices heard. And one of the ways in which we do that is to send letters to them and create a mode of communication, regular communication with our clients, where we send them letters asking them certain questions, and they will respond to us in different ways. Sometimes it's art, sometimes it's opinion about books we might have sent to them, sometimes it's about requesting papers and pens. Today, we are in conversation with Professor Mahuya Bandyopadhyay and Shruthi, CP Shruthi. Professor Mahuya Bandyopadhyay is a professor of sociology at IIT Delhi and has spent a considerable amount of her academic career looking at prisons in a certain way and investigating prison histories, lives within prison. Shruthi is a mitigation investigator with the Square Circle Clinic, and she's been doing this work for around 5 years, where she's been going to the field, speaking with our clients, speaking with their families, to construct the life of this person in their own voice and as best as we can understand it. And the purpose of these constructions is to be put in a report called Mitigation Investigation Reports that are then filed before the court as part of our legal representation. It is an exercise mandated by law, but it allows deep insights into who these people are and what prisons look like and what death row looks like. Thank you, Mahuya and Shruthi, for having this conversation with me today.
Thank you for having us.
Please.
I was just wondering, for you as a prison researcher and Shruthi, you as a mitigation investigator, how do these letters read to you? What do you read in them? Maybe Mahuya, you can go.
So for me, I think the most powerful part about the letters is, as I've also spoken about before, is methodological, because I feel that they give us a window to seeing a space that you don't otherwise see, both in terms of looking at, understanding death through convicts, yes, that is one, but also the prison itself, right? Because they're writing, if from whatever little I've read, they're writing about their everyday, they're writing about their lives that they have left behind, they're writing about some kind of imagination of the future. And I think that holds a lot of potential if one sort of really goes through those letters and tries to come up with an understanding, or, at least thematically look at some of that. And also if you think about it in terms of letter writing as a genre itself, because it's something that probably, I'm not very sure, but probably it existed before the literary novel, right? It's one way of articulating, expressing lives. And so in that sense also, it's very, very, methodologically important and powerful. And the other thing that I feel is that, it's also a very unique vantage point, because you have come to think of it, in a sense, you come to the prison exhausted, right? Exhausted in the sense of like, you're tired. That's one sense of exhausted. But the other sense of exhausted is also that you've depleted all possibilities. And this I'm borrowing from Deleuze. They're saying it's a depletion of possibility. But something comes out of depletion of possibility. So in that sense, the prison is really, a very unique vantage point. A vantage point not just to see the prison, but to see the outside as well, right? So the prisoner then, the person who is on death row, is thinking about when they're thinking about their life in terms of their kinship, in terms of their families, in terms of childhood. I think there's a lot that can emerge in terms of the state. I think a lot that can emerge. But maybe you have some other thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I think what I often think about is that as a mitigation investigator, you have access to the prisoner and you can conduct such long, detailed interviews with them. Then why is a letter important? Because you can go and meet them, have these conversations. But I feel like letters still bring in a very unique kind of information to understand who this person is. Because often when you're sitting in front of them, certain questions can be quite difficult to reflect upon. Often we ask them about, okay, this is how long you have been on death row. What are your reflections on that? And that can be a hard question to answer at that moment. But so many of the letters that we've received, they have reflected on it over days and months, and they've spoken very articulate thoughts on, okay, this is what it is like. Sometimes it's direct, sometimes it's very indirect, thoughts on that I was on death row and this is how my body felt. Now I'm not on death row anymore and this is how I feel. That's one, but I also think letters offer a very unique space in terms of being able to say things that you may not be able to say to somebody in person. There is, of course, a stark difference in social positionality between the death row prisoner and the mitigation investigator. Not just that, they are inside and you're coming from the outside, but of course there's class, caste, a lot of dynamics that are at play, when you're conducting these interviews. And it can become, and you're also, of course, part of the legal representation team. So you are more powerful in that space. So it can be a little bit hard for someone to say, I'm not really happy with how you're doing my case, or I'm not really happy with the book that you sent me, or you haven't visited me in so many months. But letters, I feel like, provide that space. Like, we have received so many letters where they have said that, okay, you haven't written to me in 6 months, so I don't really know what's happening in my case. So I feel like they're very unique. They bring in very unique kind of information that a face-to-face interview may not be able to bring. Yeah.
But also, I think, like what you said, right, it also gives them space to assert themselves and assert their own wants and desires and their unhappiness with you. That you are not, maybe you're not doing my case very well. But while you were talking, what I was just thinking is that it sounds like letter writing in prison or for death row prisoners is something that is a very common thing that happens. And maybe, Shruthi, I was wondering if you could just give us a glimpse of how, because every activity in prison is regulated. There is some amount of regulation, little or lots, on every aspect of life. And if you could tell us a little bit about how is letter writing regulated, or how is writing regulated in prison?
So the model prison manual is supposed to serve as a guidebook to regulate communication through letters. Now, while this is a guidebook, each state may have its own manual that regulates rules around writing and receiving letters. But these different manuals in different states are likely to be more narrower than the model prison manual. So letter writing, of course, is very, very heavily regulated, censored. Every letter that comes out of the prison is read by many, many officers, guards, before it actually reaches the intended person. And not just letters, but information in any form is censored. So even, for instance, newspaper that prisoners get to read, it actually looks very different from the newspapers that we read, because a lot of information that they might think is sensitive, they'll just cut it out. So the newspaper will actually have a lot of holes and just hollows. That's the newspaper that they get to read. So I'll just read one of the rules from the prison manuals. It says, no letter written in a secret language shall be allowed. The superintendent may withhold any letter which seems to him to be in any way improper or objectionable. He may also cause such passages in the letter to be erased. If a letter is written in a local language and cannot be satisfactorily translated in the prison concerned, it shall be sent to some other officer for translation in accordance with the procedure laid down for this purpose by the IG of prisons. So clearly, I mean, if the letter is not in a language that is being read or spoken in a particular state, it will be a secret language, and then the letter may not be handed over to the prisoner.
Yeah. And given a country like India where prisoners of all languages are in everywhere, how do you...
Well, I think one of the interesting things about that is that a lot of denials in prison and around the way the rules are framed is that they're framed in terms of security. So, you know, that if there's a security risk, it will not be allowed. This is okay, but if there is... Here, actually, what's interesting is it's not security. They're actually saying objectionable, blanket, you know, so there is something, I don't know, there is a kind of moral, whatever, universe that is being suggested, that there's something that is not right, but not right, not from a point of view of security, because that is something that, you know, that is generally, I think, mentioned, but...
But, you know, Mahuya, you said you referred to security and prisons and their primary lens being security, and I was just thought I could ask you a bit about so in general discourse, when we think of prisons, we think of and as we spoke of, regulated spaces and very like you enter prison, there is a strict schedule, there is a strict way where you have to bath, where you have to sleep, where you have to eat, and it's all very like everybody's standing with a baton to hit the prisoner if they don't do things. So in that sense, similar to government's total institutions, and with the uniforms, of course, or all of that. But your work specifically sort of moves away from a total institution framing. So could you talk a little bit about, one, how you see prisons, and B, what your sort of disagreement with prisons as imagined as total institutions is?
I think, I think my primary disagreement stems from the fact that much of the literature on prisons looks at prisons as ordered institutions. So it sets up this idea that this is an organization, and then this is, you know, if you look at the literature on sociology of organization, this is an organization which is strictly ordered, it's rigid, it has this, like you said, you know, very Goffmanian, but it's not just Goffman. Several others have written. And of course, there are people who have written things like, you know, American scholars who have written, like Sykes has written Society of Captives, the old one, but, you know, looking at sort of the social world of the prisoners. But fundamentally, I think they were all written from a perspective of order, presuming a certain kind of order that this organization is able to bring on. I think that when I entered the prison to do research, it was essentially chaotic for me. Because it was just, I mean, there was order. I'm not saying that it's not there, but it was very chaotic, because it's like, you know, you would see Gunti being done, and it was like, you know, it's never correct. People are not getting it right. As you know, everybody is blaming the female warders, and they're saying, "वो female warder हमेशा गड़बड़ करता है, पूरा गुमटी बंद हो जाता है." You know, so it's like you would see, like, till it was resolved, it was, you know, it was chaos. So it was really order. See, for me, were these interludes. It were interludes of order. So I felt that much of the discussion on prisons actually does not have the categories or the categories of understanding to look at chaos. And so what I write, you know, and initially I think what I wrote about, even though I kind of tried to bring in a critique, I still did write about an ordered institution. And increasingly I find myself thinking about the chaos in some of these spaces and the way in which it then impacts lives within. So in some senses, I felt that the chaos is also useful for prisoners, and it's productive. They can use it productively towards certain kinds of negotiations that they then practice. So I think working with chaos and beginning to work with chaos will probably take us in a different direction in understanding the prison. But the other important lens I felt is that when you think of the prison, you think of it as an organization that is very different from all other organizations, right? It is set apart in many ways, even though what Goffman was trying to do was to think about those similarities. But I feel that, and again, drawing from Goffman, drawing from others, to really think about the ways in which the carceral mesh actually extends itself. And in contemporary society, I think you can see that very, very clearly in various contexts. I mean, if one just looks at India, I mean, in the contemporary Indian context, you know that you don't need the prison anymore as a site of fear, right? You don't need that. Things can happen to you even without the prison.
Yeah.
So I feel that there is, again, it is productive to think about carcerality as going beyond the prison.
Yeah, I mean, even when we think about, to me, that what you call the culture of leniency also is resides side by side with the precarity also, because at what point that negotiation will break, and then at what cost? It's for the prisoner often to bear the cost of that, and often we find, and I think you're absolutely right, that chaos can be very productive. And I often think about we shouldn't think of regulating anything too tightly, because it just, one, it will break, and two, it sort of reigns in potentialities, because it's in these moments when suddenly a prisoner will feel free to do something creative or have a burst of, I don't know, fresh breath of fresh air type of thing. But if I can just ask, maybe to both of you actually, where do you place letters in this, in either a total institution framing, that is ordered institution, or as what you're saying, there is quite a bit of chaos outside, and are letters sort of a reflection of the porosity of the institute, or is there something else happening there?
Can I just quickly say something? I think that, I mean, on the one hand, we always say that, okay, the prison is one site where the state has complete control. So it's the state's report card, really, But on the other, we also know that there are these influences, and we know that, in some senses, just, when I go and do research in prison, the state has allowed that. It has enabled that. So we cannot, we also cannot completely alienate the state and think about, and so we need to think about what the state does in the prison as well. So in that, so one has to see the letter in that context as well, and then see where it's leading us, like what is it opening up. So for me, I feel, just on the basis of what I've read and having these conversations with some of you, I think it is a creative enterprise, right? You are opening some door to creativity, like to say that, okay, this you can do this, you can write this, or you can share this in this way. And I think that that's powerful.
Just to follow up on that, I was reading a paper on reform, and you talk about how and I think another older scholar talks about retributive spaces, prisons as retributive spaces, and then the idea of reform, and you talk about a bit of deterrent spaces and idea of reform and there. And I was just thinking, like, as you were talking about the fact that it is the letters are allowing prisoners to express themselves in different ways, and being able to express yourself is a kind of a important aspect of the idea of reform, being yourself, engaging with your own self. And so do you think this enterprise of writing letters, or like we write letters to prisoners because they're our clients, it's a mode of communication between the legal defense team and the client in that sense. In that sense, as legal representatives, we are co-opting the intended purpose of being in prison, or forwarding that in a way that the state should actually be doing? Or do you think the state enabling the letters coming in and out is part of that
Yeah,
whole
I think I was
process?
trying to say that the state enables that in some senses. So we cannot also, that's why I said we cannot also always say that, look at that report. I mean, we have to balance that report card because we can see that the state in some senses is enabling this. Even as we know that, certain letters will never be allowed. Some people will never be allowed to write letters. So in the same way that, when one thinks about this chaos and who does it benefit, who can produce some negotiation out of that chaos, and there are some critiques to also the way in which I write in this context, because it's almost like, well, there are some people who will never be able to negotiate, and actually I'm arguing that there are loads of irregular solidarities and irregular socialities that develop, which is what the prison is. So you don't know, you don't know that the prisoner who has absolutely nothing will not be able to negotiate something or the other. They may not be able to negotiate in the same way that, a well-known prisoner with access to a lot of money, etc. And I'm also talking about, some of my fieldwork was several years ago, where we didn't have, then they didn't have the prison canteen system. Now you have the canteen system. So it's, the access to goods is, much better now.
Avenues of negotiation are much broader.
Much broader, and, they can...
And when you're talking about solidarities, what I was thinking about is a letter that couple of letters that we received. One of them was this youngish prisoner, a youngish client, and he had written to us saying, he had sent us a story that he had written, and we had all loved it. It was a beautifully written, joyous story. And when you think of prison generally, you'd be like, what joy doing there? But it was able to find itself in it. And then there are these solidarities formed within prison as well, right? And so letters are form of building alliances of kinships. How would you...
Yeah, I feel like this idea of the one thing that cannot be controlled, or that the prisoner does not want the state to control, is the mind.
Yeah.
Right? And so the letter is a way of actually resisting that control, because you're able to, and I was reading that particular letter where this person signs off by saying something like yours, and what is it?
Regardless of
how I am, right?
Yeah.
So yours, regardless of how I am. I think, it is so telling. It's the person trying to say that, I don't know, it's like one that you it doesn't matter to you, in a sense, who I am, and that so who I am is also known through this letter, and so I feel that these sorts of alliances, or these sorts of friendships, or these sorts of connections, even and they may be very fragile, but these sorts of connections are a way of addressing that idea of the mind that is captive, right? So you can't hold the mind captive. And even if you look at some of the things that Uma Chakrabarti writes in this essay, which we have in our book, which Rimple and I edited, where one of the political prisoners actually says that when she came back from a day of spending a day at the police station where she was being questioned and interrogated, when she came back, she said one of these prisoners basically used to hold her like a baby through the night. And she said that is what kept her going. So it's those are like extraordinary acts, I think, and that's what I mean when I say that the prison enables that in some ways, right? So that is why it's a unique vantage point. And if you think about it, it's again, I'm going back to this idea of the exhausted, that it's when you have depleted all your potential and all your possibilities, that is when something new will emerge for you. And so the letter sometimes makes me feel that that's the sort of beginnings of something new emerging, whether it's thought or whether it's this sort of an expression, where it's, where just that expression, which will never be redacted, right? But which is also telling us so much.
That's what, right? Like when what Mahuya you said about the mind, you can't control the mind. And then when you're writing something which is in your mind, it's like it's those fleeting moments, or maybe not so fleeting, but maybe they linger on, those moments of freedom and being free. And like, you're just with your thoughts, with yourself. You're not maybe in a space that is sometimes violent, sometimes precarious, sometimes exhausting. You're just with yourself. And that can be, imagine that can be, I mean, both grueling but also quite freeing. But this solidarity, right? So there is a solidarity that is built inside prison because of whoever might your inmates, co-inmates be at that time. But I also want to just guard against the fact that we know there are prisons where you can't send letters. When we have clients in prisons where even if we send letters, they're not allowed to send it back. Like they can't send back any letter. So coming to your point of who can write, who can enjoy these, it could perhaps be a matter of luck. Which prison did you end up going to, and whether that prison, and it's also that, again, coming to that, I guess, culture of leniency. Is your letter going to go out? Because we know that, not just we know, it's quite common knowledge and common way of showing power, right? I will not send your letter this month if you don't behave yourself. And so it's also that they fall into that negotiation also all the time. And Shruthi, I just wanted to just bring it back to solidarity. And so, like I said, this is we writing these letters as their legal representatives. So it's not a personal relationship. It's a relationship of a professional nature. They're your client, and you brought up the power that there is obviously the point that there is a power differential. How, if at all, do you find solidarity is being built in through that? Because, or whether it's even possible, because in a way you are, as a lot of prisoners have said to us, you are like God to us, my life is in your hand, and it's almost that deferential thing. Can solidarities be built between, or have you seen them being built between the legal representative like yourself or the lawyer and the client who writes to you?
I think, can I just answer that question? I mean, do you see the letter as something more than just communicating about a person's case? And if you do, what does it communicate? And what does it help you to do? Is I think.
Yeah. So, we were discussing this earlier that obviously there is an air of formality in these letters. The way the letter starts, the way it ends, there is that they know that they're writing to legal representatives. A lot of these letters ends with saying, "Agar koi bhool chook ho gayi to maaf kar dena." That if I've written something wrong, please forgive me for that. But at the same time, there is some negotiations that are also happening, not just in when they are saying, okay, what's happening with my case? Why haven't you written to me in so many months? Or please do something soon. I trust you, but just make sure that my case gets as soon as possible. But there are also letters where, I recall this one letter where a female prisoner on death row is actually writing, "Will you be my friend? I want you to be my friend. Can you be my friend? And I felt so close to you, just communicating over letters and phone calls. I want you to, be my friend." And she's sharing a lot of personal details about her relationship with her parents, her relationship with her siblings and nieces and nephews, and what all, she's been wanting to do for them over the years, and she's not been able to do because she's in jail, she's on death row. So I think with constant communication over the years, a lot of these letters do start to feel like a letter from a friend. I don't feel like, okay, this is coming from a prisoner on death row. It just reads like a letter a friend has written to me, like another letter that I can recall. This particular prisoner is telling me, why don't you boil this particular herb and have it? This was during the pandemic, that this will really help you with your immunity. This is not something you would expect, someone that you're representing to say in the letter. But I feel like they do go beyond that transactional relationship of a mitigator and a client, or a lawyer and a client. So I feel like that's what it tells me, that in so many years of incarceration, nobody has ever seen them as anything other than a death row prisoner. Yeah.
I was just, as you were talking about this person who says, will you be my friend? I was thinking, like, if you look at what they write on, right? Some of them will write on A4 sheets, white A4 sheets. Some will be lined sheets, but it's blank pages. And it's like, you can take up all of that space, right? You don't have to worry about anything. And it just made me think about what prisoners write about. And this person who, in one of their letters, I think this was written during New Year or something. And there are like little stars made at the end, and there is a smiley face, and flowers and hearts, and then there's a shairi, which is, it is not insightful shairi or some lyrical. It's just pure one person of a certain age writing to another person and just having fun with that, right? And just reading those things, and like, what I want to bring that though to is, who are these people who are writing to us? The often carceral writing is by people who might be educated, by people who have a certain politics, so political prisoners maybe, or people who've been, they're seen as people in extraordinary situations, or extraordinary people maybe, and they are in a sense extraordinary in the context of prison. Those are not your average people who go into prison. And I was, Mawa, I was just thinking what you thought of the voice of an extraordinary prisoner and the voice of this ordinary prisoner. How do they look like, and what is new in it? How do we think about the ordinary prisoner and what they have to say and what voice they have? And
so I think that actually the ordinary prisoner has never been looked at. Generally, I mean, every time the prison is in focus, it's because there is a political prisoner who is in prison, or a high profile prisoner who is in prison. So the prison becomes a site to be known, to be understood, when you have the so-called extraordinary people in prison. So in that sense, the letters are again very exciting, because they open up the world of the ordinary prisoner. I mean, there are others. For instance, there's somebody like Meenakshi Sen, who writes in Bangla, but she writes very, very nicely and very beautifully about the ordinary prisoners that she encounters in prison. But it's the political prisoner's view of the ordinary prisoner in that sense. So the ordinary prisoner is somebody who is considered, who of course then, one has to look at in terms of thinking about, well, what is the politics of this ordinary prisoner? And I think that's what I was initially also suggesting, that when we look at the letters, I think they're also political pieces of writing, because, they're talking about, one of them, I from what I remember, they're talking about, in talking about the lives before, in talking about the cases, and talking about, the way in which the criminal justice system has handled their cases. I think they're all very, very political. I mean, if you look at other prison letter writing projects, I mean, I think Yale University has one, which is quite popular, which has also sort of had some success. But they're all really, again, statements and, pretty well-researched statements. They offer well-researched statements of what the criminal justice system is like, and what, how the laws are being practiced and what is happening to the prisoner in prison. So I think that the letter writing by the ordinary prisoner does have that potential, and to show us what the ordinary prisoner thinks in prison. The other thing I feel that is important is to really rethink this discussion or this distinction between the political and the ordinary, because I think a lot of the stuff that the ordinary prisoner, you see who the ordinary prisoner is, what are the kinds of crimes that they're in for, what kind of caste, class background, gender background are most likely to end up in prison. And I think what we have is sort of, resistant stories of resistance to certain kinds of styles of life, to certain kinds of, to a certain kind of life itself, right? Outside. So, yeah. So
But, I mean, one is the idea of resistance, and what is it that the ordinary prisoner is resisting, or could we call a death row prisoner an ordinary prisoner? I don't know, but in their profile they're very much ordinary, but so what is it that they're resisting? Because one idea of resistance is that maybe you're resisting the state, you're resisting quote unquote oppression. What are they?
No, I think they are ordinary because this can be somebody like a 22-year-old graduate who worked as a sales executive. It can be an 18-year-old migrant worker from somewhere, or it can be somebody who's completed their engineering from a top premier institution in the country. So these are ordinary people in the sense that you do come across people like this in your everyday life. In the letters that they write, again, the letters are ordinary in the sense that, they can be telling you about their prison routine, what do they do from morning to evening, or it can be about a book that I'm reading, or about friendships that I've forged, in the prison. So there are these ordinary writings, but there is also a certain extraordinariness to them because in a lot of prisons, prisoners sentenced to death are likely kept with other prisoners sentenced to death. So sometimes they don't even have interactions with, somebody who's on life imprisonment or other sentences. They're not given work. They are not allowed to take up educational, not allowed to enroll in educational programs. So there is a constant reminder of the sentence that you're on because you are different from others, and the rules that apply to you are different from others. And even despite the prison trying to impose that identity on them, what you see in these letters is, in a sense, I would say, reclaiming of their other identities, or even sometimes, building new identities for themselves. One of our clients, I remember, the family had cut ties with him, and they were not speaking to him for about 8 to 10 years. 10 years later, when we started, we had been writing to him for a while, and we suggested that, okay, if they're not meeting you or, speaking to you over phone, why don't you maybe try writing, to them? And he started writing letters to his daughter, and he would tell her things like, okay, I want you to study really well. I want you to take care of your mother, take care of your little brother. So he's trying to be a good father despite being on death row, despite being in a prison where, you're not allowed to do anything else, and there's constant just reminder of, this is what your fate is going to be. So there's a reclaiming of being a father. You see that across the board. You see that with, this particular prisoner that I mentioned earlier. She's trying to make a friend from prison. She wants to be friends with somebody who's not in prison. But she's like, no, this is what I'm just going to ask her. I'm just going to ask her if she'll be my friend. So you see a reclaiming of identities that they've already had, or just, making new identities for themselves through these letters. And there is also sometimes extraordinariness to the content of these letters, because sometimes in these letters what you see is that there will be a description of their everyday routine, and then suddenly you will see what they are anxious about. They'll write to you about their vulnerabilities or what they're feeling anxious about. So there is ordinary, but there is a disruption to that ordinary as well. Where they're just being really, sharing something that's really vulnerable, sharing with you what they're feeling and thinking. So yeah, I would say that's why it's important to read these letters as resistance. While
it's also like a resistance in the sense that we have clients from all ages. They could be 18 to 60, 65, 70, and they're also documenting their lives as they are living it and as they have lived it, because some of the questions are tell us about your childhood, or and you're also trying to get them to engage if in like a decently safe manner, and it's like, this is who I am, this is what my life was, this is what my life is. And it's that both reclaiming the voice that in a criminal justice system nobody is hearing, and so this becomes like, again, taking up space. I can take up space, nobody is going to say anything, because for years together nobody has given any space to you. And it's also it's a documentation of even the ordinary, right? This is what an ordinary Indian is in different contexts. And so it's interesting to think about it, that the death penalty or prison is you're invisible, right? You're invisible to the outside world, and through these letters they're also making themselves visible. They are sort of pushing back against the dehumanization that invisibility brings, and that kind of silencing is meant to do. But I thought I wanted to come back to actually something that Mahuya, a philosopher you had mentioned, which is Deleuze, in the beginning. And I was just wondering if you, in the letters that you have read, if at all it came to you about Deleuze's idea of becoming and what was coming through these letters. And I just thought maybe I'd pop that one in.
Before I just answer that, I just, something that you said earlier about the letters and space making, in a sense, that, they remake the space of the prison for those brief moments when the letter comes. I think that it's also important to see them in terms of their material presence, because not only do they remake the space, but it's also a letter is something that you keep, you will read again and again, you will share again and again, every time you read it, you will find something new. So I mean, the excitement is not just about that moment, but it's probably the excitement of something from the outside, and something which is very different. It's not your product from the canteen, right? It's not your, it's not something that you just ordered and your family has sent. It is something completely new, and it is from somebody who they don't really know and cannot fully place. So in that sense, you're extraordinary, because, they don't fully know you, and there is that process of knowing which is happening. So I feel like that is also quite an interesting sort of aspect that can be looked at in the letter. Yeah, for the reason I was bringing in Deleuze was really to think about this idea of what are the possibilities, right? What are the possibilities for the prisoner? What are the possibilities that the prison has to offer?
But another thing the letters do offer us a glimpse into is this kind of abandonment, right? And now what you've called and Jill Stauffer has called ethical loneliness. what I mean, when generally we speak of ethical loneliness, there's an assumption, I think, that this person or community has been the starting point is of a victimhood, but these letters are written by people whose starting point of this letter writing process might not be of victimhood, but one of being a perpetrator. And I thought it was interesting to think about and acknowledge that this kind of abandonment can be faced by anyone, regardless of what your status in criminal law might be. And I thought maybe, Mahuya, did you come across any of these?
I think it's how you look at crime, isn't it?
Mm.
Is it an individual act?
Yeah.
Is it a social act? I think as a sociologist, it is a social act.
Yeah.
It's not simply an individual act. So the minute you take that out, that there is a context in which it is happening, and one is not saying that it can be, I know this argument can be very, very, it can be twisted in very different ways. But I think that it's, when one recognizes the sociological implications of looking at crime in that way, then you understand that the individual's sort of process, the process that the individual has gone through to arrive at that moment, because, so for instance, prisoners would often say, like, I would say, if I said, start with your, tell me your life story. And typically I would say, okay, this is where I was born. And I would give my life story beginning from my birth.
Yeah.
They would not begin from their birth.
Yeah.
They would begin from the
Offense.
act of what?
Yeah.
Arrest.
Yeah.
So the disruption for them was the arrest. And now it's interesting. Many people would say, whatever's happened. But, I got arrested because of this. Right? So the whole story sometimes would be narrated around the arrest.
Yeah.
Because that is the disruption. For the state, the disruption is the crime.
Right. Yeah.
For many prisoners, the disruption is, for some it could be the circumstances around the crime. A lot of women prisoners would talk about like the circumstances that led to the crime. And for some it would be really this arrest. So I think that one needs to think about what these disjunctures mean in narratives. What are these disruptions about? And
no, I think I completely agree with you that looking at crime as an individual act serves very little purpose. And even the abandonment kind of abandonment, once you start getting them to talk about beyond just move, it takes a lot of work to get them to say, because a lot of them will keep saying, why are you interested in anything else? This is what went wrong. And you realize that there were different kinds of abandonment often. There is not, and the kind of abandonment in prison is maybe different, but it's not the first time they might have been abandoned. And in that sense, it's not an individual may at that moment be doing the act, but it's so much background to it that I
think that the important thing is to think about, what Stoffer, this is in my limited understanding, is that the idea that whether someone is wronged or has wronged, if I take that out of because though Stoffer's writing in the context of, most of our examples are from the Holocaust and so on and so forth, so they're no way comparable. But the point is that do we develop systems that listen, right? And so the letter writing, I think, becomes a way of listening, listening which is of another kind. Because so here because all the examples that you've given, most of what you're talking about is not about the case, right? You're a lawyer, but you're not here to talk about the case. You're talking about all this other stuff. So I think that the letter then offers the space for this other kind of listening to happen. And that is where Stoffer is important. Because what we're saying is that can we build systems where we listen? And it will not, then one can think about, okay, whether we listen to the perpetrator or we listen to the victim, there is a certain kind of listening act.
Or we listen to both.
Or we listen to both. Of course, we listen to both, and we listen to both with a certain kind of ethicality. And that's what she's saying. And the example that she gives of the lawyer is that the lawyer is only, there are several examples there of what you would call mishearing, right? Or that you only hear what you want to hear. And, which is what as sociologists we would do. So I go to a prison and I say, okay, there's chaos, but how do I write about this chaos? Let me just write about the order that comes after the chaos. So what am I doing here? I'm imposing certain categories and not being able to hear the chaos and what the chaos actually produces. So it's important that's the point about listening that we can take away from it. So again, I'm using the idea of loneliness, and I think the idea of loneliness definitely applies to the death row prisoner, ethical loneliness in that sense, because you may be you may be punishing the person, but can you punish as well as hear?
Yeah.
Why are those two things exclusive?
Or maybe often in we say punishment as pain, but punishment is not listening. Maybe that is also part of the idea of punishment. I'm just not relevant anymore. Because I think the reason to bring that question up is because the moment we start talking about abandonment and no one's hearing me, that there is a voice somewhere there which is saying, but look at who they are. But that's not the point. The point is, how do you listen? And you might listen differently, but it's so integral to existence, or it's integral to living and sort of acknowledging that the other person is living. Just listening and not imposing my idea of you on you, or just
because the fact is one is not listening to anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, when we are not listening to the death row convict, we are not listening to others as well. I mean, the point is that a certain kind of listening is dead and gone. I mean, that's. So we have this, that's the problem.
Yeah.
So when you say, okay, the argument that one can make is that, okay, when you make this argument that, okay, we must listen to the death row convict, the opposite argument is that, but why? Because, the person has committed serious, heinous crimes. But because we do not have a culture of listening, we do not have a culture of ethical listening, we do not have a culture of humanizing. Actually, nobody is humanized, and we forget that. I think we forget that. And that's
Last question I think we can just have, because I think we've reached our limits. And we've discussed parts of it. We've just discussed it actually. But what is the value of these letters beyond giving me information as a mitigation investigator or as a lawyer? Why should people be concerned with these voices? What's the value that they bring to any discourse, whether prison discourse or about society or about systems, and particularly when they're just writing about themselves, right? What's the value of studying these, talking about them?
I mean, I think as much value as there is in studying, understanding any voice that is silenced. And so I would say that, why is it important to silence these voices? If you ask the opposite question, right? This is a person who has absolutely no power. You have complete power over this person. You decide you have already decided who this person is. So why can we not rely on benevolence, right? And say, okay, let the person say whatever they want. Because, you've already framed the person, right? The person already exists in a certain kind of other space. And that's the narrative that everybody will obviously believe. So one can ask the other question as well. And I think, but for me, as I've said before, I think the value is in the vantage point of the prison. The value is in this kind of position where, for a death row convict, again, it's an extreme form of loss of all kind of potentiality.
Yeah.
And that position of loss of potentiality opens you up to sort of ways of looking at the world, looking at society, looking at our institutions, which we don't have. That's a vantage point that you and I don't have. And so that is a unique vantage point. And I think it can offer us the possibility of rethinking some of our institutions and some of our social relations, some of what we are doing in prison. So even for the person therefore on death, that learning, that knowledge, that understanding is something that perhaps we could value. The other is that once the decision on a punishment is taken, right, it doesn't close the door to humanizing. And so you listen, you hear, we talk about these stories because we say that as a society, it's important to humanize. It's important to humanize even the one who has committed heinous acts of violence. And we have to learn to live with that. Going by the kind of violent society that we encounter everywhere, even our own, I think this is very, very important.
No, I think the conversation itself is of so much value. I mean, I'm not even getting into the content of these letters, but there is, I think, so much othering at play that you don't think that this person has the same emotions, like being sad, being disappointed, or being happy, or experiencing joy as you. And when you read these letters, you can see that, like I said, it feels like a letter from a friend. You don't feel like this is coming from someone on death row. And I feel like that's if we have to move past this point of understanding this person only from the point of this one incident that defines their life, you have to first start considering them as humans, because we're not even there.
It's also like I wonder if it's also like that mechanism, right? That we don't want to hear these voices because both they are other, but the slight possibility that they are not the other, that they somehow seem very close to us. And the discomfort with that both with that, have I condemned somebody to death who is too much like me, or that, what does it say about me if somebody who has done these horrific acts of violence also faces the same emotion as me, right? So it's also both a discomfort, but a disgust maybe, and also a discomfort that I don't maybe like, it's better you don't speak, because what if you're just like me? What might it say about the person who's condemning, or us as society in whose name you are, the condemnation is happening to protect us. But what we find almost always, not even almost, always, that they are us, we are them. It's the same people. So I think thank you so much. Any last things that you might want to add?
No, thank you.
Thanks, Mahuya. Thanks, Shruthi. Thank you.